Well, good afternoon, everyone, and greetings from Tampa, Florida. Aloha Friday. It's my pleasure this afternoon to introduce Dr. Eli Niewood. Dr. Niewood is currently the Vice President for the Air Force program at MITRE Corporation, Air Force and Space Force. He's also the director for what's called the QUIC, or the cross-cutting technologies area, where different disciplines come together. Prior to his role at MITRE, he was the director of MIT Lincoln Labs division for supporting the Air Force Rapid Capability Office, the RCO. Those of you that haven't heard that, it's a very, very cool organization. And lastly, Eli has also served on the Air Force Scientific Advisory Board from 2011 to 14, I believe. He has a bachelor's, a master's, and PhD in aeronautics and astronautics from MIT. And he also has a certificate from the Harvard Kennedy School program for senior executives. And for those of you in the basics course, that was the thing that I was the rapporteur for a while ago. And while all that introduction is extremely impressive, the thing that I love best is that Dr. Niewood is also the STEM champion and serves on MITRE's STEM Advisory Council as one of the executive board folks, helping make possible programs like this for our participation. Melvin, Lynn, Ivy, and some of the others, or if we wouldn't be able to do this without his support. So with that introduction, sir, over to you.
Great, thanks a lot, Mike. First of all, thanks everyone for attending today. I apologize for not being there at MIT in person today. That was my goal and my plan. But I will say, fortunately, my daughter had a baby boy this Monday down in the DC area, and so we are down in DC for the week. So I changed plans at the last minute on you all, and happy to be able to do this, virtually, if not in person. My goal for today is to at least have you all understand the title of this talk by the time we're done: Systems Analysis of an Engineer's Career. I think the easier part to understand, things I wish I had known before I started my career. At the, sort of at the same time in my career, my life that you are now, what are things that, might have helped me to know back then? And I'll go through those, and then I think what we'll do maybe is pause for questions after each one, or, after each one or two. So I'll start with lesson one, and my lesson one is, focus your career and pick a career that you find exciting. And I'll come back to this in my life, but again, very similar to many of you, when I was a rising senior in high school, I went out, I was living in New Jersey at the time, and went to a program at the University of Southern California in Los Angeles for the summer to, learn what engineering was and take on engineering. And I get out there, and the very first day you're there, you show up, at some point in the day. That evening, there's a reception with the faculty who are going to be, mentoring each of the students, and, who have projects that the 15 or so students that were part of this program, a lot smaller than BeaverWorks, are going to do. And this guy, clearly faculty, starts coming up to me. He has hair going in every direction, clearly has not been combed in a long time, maybe not been shampooed in a little while, shirt, completely tucked out, just looks like a mess. And he comes up to me and he goes, "How would you like to learn about chaos?" And he's incredibly excited, incredibly passionate. I have no idea what he means by chaos. But just his enthusiasm, right away, I want to do this. And he was a professor of aerospace engineering. I spent the summer working with him and with a graduate student. And, that enthusiasm, I fell in love with that and absorbed a huge amount of it. And I think, when someone asks me today what I do, I still say I am an aerospace engineer. I mean, it is not what I spent most of my day doing. I manage people, as Mike said, I help with things like the STEM Council here at MITRE. I deal with HR topics and things like that. But I still define myself as a rocket scientist and an aerospace engineer. My wife bought me a shirt, it actually has Marvin the Martian on it, and it's underneath it says, actually, I am a rocket scientist. Now, I think it's unfair that she bought the shirt for me, and she still makes fun of me for any time I wear this shirt. I don't know how those things go together. Like, you shouldn't be allowed to do that. But
What are they saying?
it says, actually, I am a rocket scientist under it, she doesn't, whatever. But so, I think it's really important. People talk about work-life balance all the time. You don't want your work to be your life. You don't want your life to be your work. I think both are true. But I think you want to do something, and you want to focus your career on something that you love, and I love to go home from work at the end of the day, like especially now I get to go see my new grandson, but I also love to come to work in the morning, and I think you want to be able to do both. And then maybe what I'll do is I'll go on to the second lesson, and then we'll pause for I'll pause there for some questions. Second lesson I'd like to impart is embrace change. And I often say, when you're faced with a choice, do the thing, pick the choice that scares you. And so, I mentioned going out to USC and going out to this program. So as I said, I was a high school student at the time, probably the same age as many of you, had never spent significant time away from home. And I'm an Orthodox Jew, and so what I can eat, fairly constrained. I keep fairly strict version of keeping kosher. I'm going out to California. Everyone else is going to eat in the cafeteria. I don't know what I'm going to eat out at this program, and so my parents, box up a toaster oven for me. This is before microwaves were common, right? Certainly, before they were small. Maybe we had one at the time. They box up this toaster oven for me, and I'm going to get some frozen food from a local supermarket, and heat it up in this toaster oven. That's what I'm going to eat for the summer. Pick up the toaster oven, from under the airplane. Go to heat up dinner that first night. Toaster oven doesn't work, and so the TA for the program. I go to him, what should I do? He helps me. He's got a pocket knife with a screwdriver on it. Also in this day, toaster ovens were pretty simple. We open it up. There's a wire that's loose. He's like, you just got to get that wire, back on the post, and it'll probably work. We put it back on the post, close it back up, doesn't work. Open it back up, the wires come loose, since the last time that I closed it up. Go through this cycle like 5 or 6 times. I'm very careful. He told me, make sure to unplug the toaster oven before you open it up. I unplug it, I unscrew it, I put it back on, try to get the screw to hold on, close it back up, plug it back in, try it, and it doesn't work, over and over again. And go ahead, open it up again, not realizing that I forgot to unplug it. Put the screwdriver in, get it back on, and, zap, big shock through the screwdriver. I'm practically in tears at this point, right? I've been working to get this thing to work. And, I'm like, all right, whatever. I close it back up, I plug it back in, and lo and behold, it works, right? Because what happened, when the shock went through, the wire and the screwdriver, it basically soldered the wire back to the post. So it finally stuck. Okay, now I've got food for the summer. I was pretty afraid to go out to this program, on my own, like I said, not knowing, it's hard. You don't know what you're going to eat the next day, kind of thing. Not that food is everything, but it matters, right? I had an incredible experience at that program. The work that I did there, I submitted as part of what at the time was the Westinghouse Talent Search. I think now it's the I forget who operates it now, get to go to Washington, D.C. with, 30 other, students selected from across the country. You meet your congressman and your senator, great experience. It was incredibly worth it. I am so happy that I took that risk. Mike mentioned some of my roles at Lincoln. One of my roles at Lincoln was I ran the engineering division at Lincoln for a number of years, which is where, we owned the machine shops for Lincoln. We owned the clean rooms. We built large radars. We built space payloads. Okay, I'm the one, my junior year at MIT, pretty close to where some of you are sitting right now. We had junior project where everyone went to the machine shop at MIT, learned how to use it, and had to build something over the course of the year in that machine shop. I was the student that the people who ran the machine shop said, Ellie, whatever you want, you don't need to do it. We will use the lathe, we will use the press, we will do all that for you. Why? Because they did not want me touching their machines. They knew either the machine or I was in trouble if I touched it. And yet, so I can't do those things. And yet at Lincoln, I took on this role, running a division, that is what the division and everyone in it did. And again, it was scary. I didn't know if I could succeed in that job. And became incredibly rewarding. One of the great experiences of my career was taking that division and shaping it in a different direction. Even coming to MITRE, after 22 years at Lincoln, switching roles, going to a new place where they had no job defined for me. I essentially made up my own job after I got here, have had 5 or 6 different jobs, but ultimately have been fairly successful. Required sort of a leap of faith. Can you do this? And so, I push all of you as you think about where to go to school, as you think about what career to take on, pick something you don't know if you can do and take that risk. I think more often than not, you will find it pays off. So let me pause there before I go on to the other lessons. If there's any questions there, happy to take it. Happy to take those before we move on. I will keep going then. So next lesson I want to talk about is.
Hey, Ellie, I have a question.
Okay.
So, to break the ice. So what was the most challenging and most scary assignment at Lincoln Laboratory?
Yeah, it was definitely, for me, it was that Division 7, leading the engineering division role, because it forced me to, rely on other people for their expertise when I did not have the expertise to really understand their work. I feel like until that time, everything I did, I led people doing things that I could do myself. That was the first time where, when they would come to me and say, this is not going to work because of X, Y, Z, I had to know them well enough to understand whether that was true or not. I could not judge it myself. And that was hard for me. It really, forced me to put faith in other people in ways that I was very uncomfortable with.
I think we have one question from Raphael.
Yeah, we've got another question here. Did you ever consider any other careers? And if so, what made you choose aerospace engineering over them?
Yeah, I would say I certainly considered many careers. At the time I was in high school, my father was an engineer. My mother did not want me to be an engineer. She loved my father, but she didn't think that was a good path for her children. And so as I started to, focus on engineering as what I wanted to do, she had me go to some, essentially psychologist, but, to take a bunch of aptitude tests to figure out what is the right career for you. And she was very excited. It was going to come back with something, other than engineering, and that is what I should do. So the number one thing it said I should do with my career was to be a forest ranger. My mom very quickly gave up and stopped pushing back on me being an engineer. I would say the other thing, I certainly thought about, I I still, but certainly, when I was the age of many of you, I loved history. I loved to read history. I loved to visit historical sites around the country. I certainly thought about being a historian. And that was definitely, something very different that I considered. But again, that experience at USC just sold me on engineering, and I've been set on that path ever since.
All right, excellent. So we'll go ahead and call on Meryl Zhang. You had a question?
Yeah, what would you say is the best and worst part of your job?
Yeah. So the worst part I would say is, sort of dealing with the bureaucracy and the corporate pieces that come as you manage large organizations, right? You can't get away from it. When an organization gets big enough, you need to have HR practices, you need to have business operations practices, you need to have all of that. I recognize that you need all those things. Doesn't mean I want to do them. And so I would say, I understand that comes with the job, and certainly I would say the HR pieces, when you have an employee that is not the right fit for the job, and that you need to manage out, that can be incredibly painful and challenging. The best part is enabling others to do important things, and I'll come back to that actually. I think as I go through this, yeah, I think it is when it's not your own accomplishments, but it's you enabling others to have those accomplishments. And particularly, I'd say, again, I'll come back to that Division 7 example. When I took that role at Lincoln, I think the division had hit sort of a low point, both in how it saw itself and how other people at Lincoln saw it. It did not have the prestige it could have or should have. And there were a set of leaders in the division who were not, I think, thought of incredibly highly across Lincoln. And it was a misperception. And I think, they had been put in leadership and in an environment where they could not thrive. And, I don't take much credit for it, but I was able to shift the environment enough that their natural talents just sort of blossomed. And all of a sudden you had people, doing incredible things that people did not think could have done that. That was incredibly rewarding. And that kind of thing, I would say, is the best part of the job for me. Okay, let me go on to lesson 3, and again, happy to take more questions later. I would say lesson 3 for me is, as I talked about working on something you enjoy, but also work on something that matters. And this really hit home for me. I was a graduate student at MIT. I got to go to a conference in Viareggio, Italy, which was incredible. I'd never been to Italy before. Got to do some sightseeing, spent a weekend in Florence. I was a graduate student. My wife was a graduate student. We were about to have our first kid. So I spent a very poor weekend in Florence, at a youth hostel, doing things that were mostly free, but it was still incredible. But I'm sitting there at the International Electric Propulsion Conference giving a talk around my thesis research. And I am confident that there is no one in that room who can ask me a question that I cannot answer. I know this material as well as anyone there. But I also realized that the 15 people in the room are the only people in the world who actually care about what I'm talking about. That is it. The work could go away and it wouldn't really significantly matter to anyone else or to their lives. And that was deflating for me. And ever since, I've wanted to work on things that were really important. I mentioned I have a new grandson. I actually have 2 other grandchildren. The oldest is a granddaughter. She's about 2.5 now. And I usually work in the office. I happened to be working at home one day because she was visiting along with my son and daughter-in-law. And they're all in the living room playing, but I'm working from home and I'm sitting there. I'm on a meeting, and my granddaughter starts toddling over, My wife says to her, "Oh, Gwen, don't bug Grandpa now. He's busy, saving the world." What are we talking about? It's a meeting around nuclear command, control, and communications, right? How do we ensure that the United States leadership can talk to the bombers and the missile fields under attack? And hopefully never happens, right? We never have to use that capability ever. But the way we keep from using that capability is by making sure that no matter what, it will be there. This is incredibly important. Now, my role in it may be less so, right? But I am working on something that really matters for the lives of everyone on this planet. And that's an incredible feeling, right? That even if you contribute some very small thing to that, it is important for so many of us. I'll give one other lesson, and again, maybe pause for questions after that. This lesson is practice doesn't make perfect. And I don't know if Bob remembers this. I think I've mentioned it, once or twice when I've done this seminar before. I'm a relatively new staff person at Lincoln, and we don't at the time give briefings electronically, right? I don't think PowerPoint existed at the time. We have view graph projectors, basically a big bulb with a lens, and you put a piece of plastic on it, which has your chart printed on that piece of plastic. And I'm going to give, my very first briefing to our sponsor in Washington. And I, get the charts. You get the charts printed a week before, right? It's not like you can change something at the last minute, in your PowerPoint, right? You got to get it printed and carry the printouts on the plane down to Washington. I practiced that briefing, 2 or 3 times a day for a week. I practiced it in the morning, I practiced it in the afternoon, and I practiced it after my afternoon snack in the afternoon. Get to Washington, giving the briefing for the sponsor, put the first chart up, and there's a little smudge on the chart. No one seems to notice. Put the second chart up, and you can clearly make out my fingerprints on that piece of plastic. Put the third chart up, and everyone notices that there are marks on this piece of plastic. What happened? I practiced every day after having a candy bar in the middle of the afternoon, hadn't washed my hands, and there it is, right? Everyone can see it. The sponsor, my boss, all very nice about it, really deflate things. But I did learn a lesson from that. I will say, have someone who I've worked with at MITRE, you can tell when he gives the talk that he's practiced over and over, and when he's just having a conversation with you. And when he's just having that conversation as he gives a briefing, it is 100 times better than when he's practiced it many times, right? There is a value to what you say in and of the moment that you don't want to lose. Okay, I will keep going. Lesson number 5, I think one that, my wife is actually, she does a lot of coaching and mentoring. She does a lot of work with STEM and with diversity and equity inclusion. She always makes this point. I copied from her. And I think something important for you all to know, maybe not right away, maybe not in college, but as you go out in your careers. People don't leave bad jobs. People leave bad bosses. When I moved to Division 7, to the engineering division at Lincoln, there was the head of the division had been there for about a year, and someone warned me or told me, "Oh, you don't want to work for Bill. When I come in the morning, Bill's just sitting there with his feet up on the table, reading his newspaper, having his coffee. He doesn't work that hard." And so I'm a little nervous, a little worried, about working for Bill. Get over there. This guy is the best. Well, Bob's on the call, so I shouldn't say best. One of the best supervisors I have ever had, right? Bob, you're definitely up there too. He just does an incredible job of empowering the people who work for him. He doesn't impose what he wants. He works with them to understand what they are good at. How he can put them in an environment where they thrive. I learned an incredible amount from him. What was going on with reading the newspaper at 8 o'clock in the morning? Well, one day I had to get to the airport. I had to go into work, pick up material, and then go to the airport. So I got to work at around 6 a.m. Bill Brown had already been there for half an hour working. So what happened? He showed up every day at 5:30. At 8 o'clock, he took a short break, read the newspaper, had his coffee, and then got back to work. He was not slacking off. The person who thought that was totally mistaken. I had another supervisor who just berated people and didn't treat them fairly. I felt like ended up betraying me, to his boss, sort of threw me under the table. I shouldn't have worked for him as long as I did. I should have, moved on to something else even sooner. You cannot fix a bad boss. You will get an incredible amount from the good ones. So I'll pause there. I see there's a couple
Yeah,
questions.
we do have a couple of questions.
Yeah.
Alexander, go ahead.
Yeah, so I just wanted to know, like, how did you get to where you are today? Like, what are the best ways to climb up the aerospace ladder, and what was the experience like for you?
Yeah, I this is not where I expected to be when I started my career. I didn't have a plan. I don't even know that I had ambitions to rise, to where I am now. I would say what I have always done is, get into a position, get into a role, learn to succeed there, and then start to think about the next one, right? Not that whole path. I don't think you can envision your whole ladder. There's just too many different directions things can go in. But I think what you can see is what is the next best thing, that will help you grow and take on new challenges. And I also think, when I start to think I could do my job better than the person that I'm working for, it's either time to take on their job or find something else to do. And so that has always served me well. I hope that helps.
Thank you.
I wanted to know what made you decide that you wanted to go to grad school?
Yeah, I would say, and when I think back to that time, I really wanted to learn how to do research, and I wanted to learn, how to operate independently. I felt as an undergraduate, I learned an incredible amount. I walked away with a huge body of knowledge, but didn't know, didn't think, could I, drive what I was doing myself, and, sort of hope that, that would come, as I got to do more independent research. I will say, I was fairly I thought of myself as fairly successful as an undergrad. It felt like a natural path at the time. There were places that wanted me, there were fellowships that I could take on. It felt like, a way to continue to develop myself that I, not listening to my own advice, I didn't have it at the time of do something scary. It felt like this was something I would be successful at.
Why didn't you stay with Bill?
Bill retired, and I took his job, when he retired. Yeah, no, I would have enjoyed working for him for longer. Although I'd say, I learned a huge amount from him, right? I mean, I feel like I might have learned more over time, but even in just the year I was working for him, it's helped shape how I lead other people in what I think are great ways.
All right, Lisa, for the classroom, the lecture hall, there's a question.
Okay. I know you said you expressed like an interest in engineering since you were young, but was there like any event that made you choose specifically aerospace?
Yeah, so look, when I was young, I wanted to be an astronaut. At some point, it became clear that was not a good path for me. Again, I think that experience at USC, just happening to be assigned to an aerospace engineering professor. Not that the mathematical work we did in CHAOS was that tied to aerospace. It was largely fluid mechanics work. Going to MIT, and how familiar you all with the undergraduate program there, but actually transferred to MIT and came into MIT as a sophomore. And in the sophomore year in aeronautics and astronautics, you take what's called unified engineering. It's a year-long, 2-course per semester equivalent class, course at MIT. And I was incredibly attracted to that, right? The idea that you would in one class sort of combine all these different disciplines and learn them as one was something that was really exciting to me. And so I would say there were sort of these little things all along the way that kept pushing me in that direction. I don't know that it was one sort of aha moment that pushed me there.
Okay, we're good in the room.
Okay. Why don't I go on to some of the other lessons, and again, can come back to some of the questions when we're done. This is one I think, really important and, really something, people should take to heart. I say, have beliefs, stick to them, and take pride in them. I talked about the fact that I'm an Orthodox Jew, right? It means that I need to be home Friday before sundown and don't do any work, don't use my phone, don't use any electronics, don't travel other than where I can walk until Saturday after nightfall. And, it's always, it's just part of my life. Right? It's not something I would ever question. I mean, unless, lives are at stake, in which case that obviously takes priority. But if it's not at that level, that's part of, just one aspect of being an Orthodox Jew. I've always, I wear a yarmulke. It's on my head all the time. People see it. I think people, people who know me know this. I've been at Lincoln probably a year or two. And we had an urgent project for a sponsor. Again, this will date me, right? But we got a bunch of paper plots showing the radar cross-section of an aircraft on paper. And we needed to get them into some sort of electronic form that we could share with other people and use ourselves electronically. And I came up with a way where we could scan them and put them in Adobe Illustrator, and then you take, trace them in Adobe Illustrator and do some Excel, and all of a sudden you've got an electronic version of it. And we start this on Wednesday afternoon, spend all day Thursday on it. It's sort of, grunt work, but, pitch in and do it. It's Friday. I am not really paying attention to the time. Just completely absorbed in taking hundreds of these pieces of paper and turning them into something electronic. And my boss taps my shoulder and says, "You need to leave now." And I look at him like, "What are you talking about? I'm in the middle of this." And he goes like this, and he goes, "You need to go. Sundown is in an hour." And this is someone who I would not have thought was that sympathetic, to my religious beliefs. Certainly did not subscribe to religious beliefs of any kind, but recognized that this was important to me. And that meant it was important to him as a leader. And, my showing, that this is something I stick to, made that impression on him. This is probably 15 years later. I now run a group. And there's another person in the group who also is an Orthodox Jew, and we typically, leave, together, Friday afternoons shortly before sundown. His commute was a little longer than mine. Someone in the group comes up to me who works for me and says, "I'm a Seventh-day Adventist, and I need to leave early on Fridays. Is that okay?" And I look at him like, "Don't you see me and, this other person leaving every Friday?" Well, it turns out, I don't know if his commute was a little longer than ours, or Seventh-day Adventists start their Sabbath a little bit before Orthodox Jews. I don't know. He just happened to leave every Friday, about 15, 20 minutes before us. Didn't know that we did this every day. Not every day, every Friday. It reminded me, look, this isn't just for me. I now need to turn this back and make sure other people feel comfortable in the same ways. He shouldn't have had to feel uncomfortable asking me about that. And so again, I think it's important for all of you, whatever those beliefs are. They may not be religious, they may be ethical, they may be scientific, whatever they are. What is core to you and what matters to you, make sure other people know that and be proud of it and live your life that way.
Yeah, to kind of follow with that, sir, we've got a question from Anurag. I'm probably mispronouncing that.
Do you want to ask it or do you want?
Oh yeah, I can ask it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I found your story about how you integrate faith and scientific work. I thought that was very inspiring. What role does your faith play in your motivation and drive to do the work that you do?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say, look, at some level they are separate, but I do think, again, that passion to do something that matters is coupled, to my faith in ways I probably don't think about very often, but your question sort of forces me to think about, right? It's not about the money, it's not about the prestige. It's about really making a difference for people. And I think that's something, that it was ingrained in me, growing up, as part of that religion and as part of that faith, right? There is something, for me, again, I'm not proselytizing. This is not the right, faith for many people. And, faith is not the right thing for many people. I don't mean to proselytize at all. But for me, it's helped me see there is something that matters, beyond myself. And I think that's reflected in my passion for the work that I do.
Thank you. That's very inspiring.
Yeah.
All right, and the next question that we have is from Sai-Cheng Wang.
My question is, do you think it's possible to fuse, do you think it's possible to like combine one's interest in engineering with one's interest in social studies? And are there like interdisciplinary studies at this intersection?
Yeah, I mean, I have not done that, although I would say, maybe not quite, for example, I love to read and learn about how people think and how societies organize. And, that definitely has had impact on my leadership style, right? So there's some psychology there, there's behavioral science, there's certainly social science around how society has evolved and what kind of, social structures work. So, I don't know that it plays a role in my technical work, but it certainly has played a strong role in my leadership style. And then there are many people who study that intersection, right? The intersection between technology and policy, the impact of technology on, on history, on science. There are many, certainly academically, there's a lot of that intersection. I think even as you move out into the professional world, there are people who operate at that boundary. It's a little less common, but it's certainly possible to do that. Okay, all right, and let me go on to the next lesson, which all about, I mentioned my wife does a lot of work in the area of diversity and equity and inclusion. These things matter, and you can help and make a difference, with the way you approach them, and what you say and do. At one point, in my career, we were having a diversity conference, and I was asked to be on a panel at that conference, talking about, how we thought about, how we reacted, to this topic. At the time, people just talked about diversity. Now we talk about diversity and equity and inclusion, and the title gets longer. And there was a woman on the panel. There was a person of color. I saw myself as representing white men on the panel. And I said, I'm not really diverse, but here's how I see it, and here's how I see the challenge. Someone said, Eli, I think of you as the Orthodox Jew on the panel, and you're just as diverse as the rest of us. And it really forced me to think about, how I stand up and stand out. Again, it's become much more common. People put their pronouns in their email signature, other places. I had, when I became an officer at MITRE about 3 years ago, almost now, it was not common here for people to use their pronouns. It's not something in the technical fields, you see it less, I think, than in other fields, at least in engineering. Although again, I think that's changed. And my pronouns are fairly obvious, I think, when someone looks at me and when they've talked to me. But I felt as a leader, my putting them in my email signature allowed other people to do the same, who maybe didn't have the same comfort in where they were and didn't feel that they could speak out. And so I did. I put them in my email signature. About 6 months later, we're having an employee all hands meeting, and there's open chat. Anyone can put an anonymous comment or question in the chat. And someone put a comment in that I just felt was incredibly hurtful around how other people, use pronouns, basically invalidating someone's ability to decide for themselves what pronouns they could use. And so I have an internal blog here at MITRE. I wrote a blog post about why I had put my pronouns in my email signature and what it meant to me, and got like hundreds of responses from people saying, this helped me. It made me feel great. It made a difference. Look, I'm a vice president here. You don't all sit in that same position, but I still think every day you are making someone else more or less comfortable with being themselves in the environment they are in. And I think you really need to take that responsibility seriously and create the environment that allows everyone to bring their full selves to their BeaverWorks class, to a class project, to a summer, employment, wherever it is. This is for all of us to take on. And I think only by us all doing that can we really change things in this area for the better. One more lesson, and then I'll stop and take questions. And I talked about this a little bit before. Just wanted to formalize it as a lesson. Enabling others is always more rewarding than doing things yourself. I mentioned this briefing that I gave at Lincoln. At Lincoln, we always had, every year was the Air Vehicle Survivability Workshop. And when I started my career, getting to give a briefing at that workshop was sort of the highlight of the year. You're doing good work, we want you to present here. One year I got to give 3 briefings at that workshop. I was ecstatic. 5, 6 years later, I'm an assistant group leader, whatever. I'm sitting there at that workshop watching 20 people give briefings that I helped them make. I hired some of those people, I mentored some of them, I steered their work. That is way better than giving 3 of those talks. It's now probably a year ago, actually it's probably almost exactly a year ago. I just took on this role at MITRE, leading the Air and Space Forces Center. And I go back to Lincoln for not quite the same conference, but almost the same conference. And a person who I hired and mentored and trained, not by myself, obviously other people contribute, is now running that conference, and she is helping 20 other people give those talks. And I feel like, wow, it's not just the 20 people I helped. I helped, 20 people who now help 20 people who, do way more than I could ever do myself. I'm not objective. I still think I could give a better talk than any of them, but I could not give a better talk than 400 of them. And that, I think, seeing that and learning how to do that, not for you today in high school, not in college, but as you think about your long-term careers, as you help others, do more and work through them, I think incredibly rewarding. So let me stop there. Happy to take more questions and discuss any of these topics with you all.
Yeah, we've got a question that's liked a bunch of times from Adam Tong. So over to you.
Great.
What extracurricular activities did you do during high school that helped support your interest in engineering?
Yeah, so I went to an Orthodox Jewish high school, And so I had essentially religious studies for about 4 hours in the morning, and then secular studies for, till late in the day. So my extracurriculars were fairly limited. I got on the bus around 7 a.m. and got home around 7 p.m. I was not a big athlete, in school. I've actually, in the last 10 years, I've started running and biking and swimming. I do a short triathlon every year, but that was not me in high school. The only extracurriculars I really did was, I had a job on the weekends. I had various jobs on the weekends. And I would say certainly, learning what it meant to show up, to work with others. But most of those jobs were actually, service jobs. I worked behind the counter at a store. I think taught me a lot about, what it meant to, work with others, and that really positioned me to be better in my career. But the extracurriculars themselves less so. And it wasn't at the time. You could get into college not being president of 5 clubs in high school. I don't think that's true anymore. My kids had a very different experience, but that was not part of the requirement back when I was applying to MIT.
And Adam, you had a second question that I think some other folks are also very interested in. Could you elaborate?
Okay, so regarding DEI, have you worked with people that have ADHD or autism, and if so, how did you support them at work?
Yeah, I've worked with a couple. I would say relatively small number. Again, I think the biggest things that I've seen, and you should probably ask, it'd be good to ask those people as well, if it was helpful, I think is, at the same time, and this will sound like a contradiction, treat them like everyone else, but also make space for what they need. And look, I think the reality is we should make space for everyone, right? But understand that there are people with autism. It'll be hard for them to not do things by the book, right? They want to have, at least again, my experience. I am far from an expert here. They'll lay everything out. They'll explore the various options. They'll be very, very thorough in what they do. Whereas I'll be like, let's just do this differently and just wing it. And they are uncomfortable with that. And so I think just, recognizing that and understanding it will take something different to bring them along than maybe is what I would bring along is, I think, what has helped me help them. ADHD obviously different, and each of these things require different ways in which you help people. But I do think it's just even just having the making sure the space is safe enough where they can acknowledge, where they can say this is an issue for them, right? I wouldn't always notice, right? I mean, again, it depends how severe it is, but there have been people who've said things to me like, oh, I have some autism. I had no idea. And the fact that they felt they could speak up about it, I think is sort of the first step to take to then enabling them to do that kind of work, to work successfully.
All right, we have a question from this man.
Thank you.
I was just curious what you find most rewarding in your line of work and how someone would go about finding their passion and a niche for them that brings them fulfillment and satisfaction in their work.
Yeah, and again, I would separate those two things a little bit. I think there's what you find exciting and there's what, you find rewarding. And it's great if they're the same. And I think I've been lucky that they have, they have. I think, look, find what's exciting. You have to try some things, right? It may not be the first thing you do. I also say it is, I believe, sort of gut feel, right? Again, when I got to MIT, and I'm looking through this, again, course catalog was printed on paper. It was like 400 pages long, right? And you got it in the mail before you showed up. And I read that description of unified engineering. It said something to me, right? I read a description of fluid mechanics, and I read a description of, third session of calculus. didn't say the same thing to me that unified engineering did in that description. You know, whether it was just written better or it was really what the content was that drove me. I think you just have to be open to, you know, seeing those things, exploring, and then, you know, hearing it for yourself when it rings a bell and says something to you. You know, the impact piece, again, I believe is a little bit different. And look, the impact you can have as a high school student, different than the impact you can have in college, you know, different than the impact you can have when you first come out of school. It's not the same as what I can do at my level, given, you know, where I am in my experience. Don't expect that. But I do think, you know, look for places where you can accomplish things and where you see other people, you know, being listened to and being able to have, you know, empowered to make a bit of a difference, you know, and not pushed into some rote role that doesn't, you know, allow them, you know, to work on things that, you know, that achieve change. I don't have a great answer. I don't think it's easy. I think you just have to try and be open to it.
Okay, Rohan had a question earlier in the discussion.
Rohan Dugard, right?
Yeah, good boss, bad boss.
Yeah. So when you were talking about like your experience with your bosses in the past, it made me wonder, like, how do you tell a good boss from a bad one early on before you get like too deep into like the position?
Yeah. So, you know, and one maybe a little more relevant to some of you is, you know, my wife, I'll quote her, refer to her, often talks about graduate school advisors and principal investigators, right? That, you know, you're a graduate student, there are good labs to go to, and there are bad labs. The other graduate students mostly know which those are. And so I think talk to people, right? Talk to the people who are in the role that you will be in. You know, reach out. What's your experience been like when you go and interview somewhere, right? You know, how does, you know, the direct supervisor interact with you? I might not ask it this way, but do they micromanage you? Do they disappear on you? Neither of which you want, right? Both are bad in very different directions. Or do they, you know, support you and get you steered in the right direction? And then give you time and freedom to figure out for yourself the right path to go on. But I do think, you know, the best way is through other people who are working, you know, for that person. What's their experience been like? I think that will tell you the most, right? I think you find, you know, some of these people who turn out are really toxic are incredibly charismatic, right? I mean, my senses, anecdotally, I have no data, those things go together. I wouldn't necessarily trust your own instincts, just meeting someone for an hour. I would ask the people who have been in that position and have been working for that person what they saw and thought.
All right, so we have one surprise question here. It's going to come from me because
Okay.
we had a discussion about this in our class, and I want to get your thoughts. How soon do you think, or do you think we will have the first permanent settlement on the moon?
I think we are far away. I just feel like, you know, there are so many other things that are sort of pressing world problems that, you know, we are struggling to get after and address. Will we have people back on the moon? I think we will pretty soon. Permanent settlement feels like an investment that is fairly significant. You know, Twitter aside, I try not to discount Elon Musk. You know, if he says he wants to have a permanent settlement on Mars, you know, he's overcome some fairly large, you know, barriers. I will say we had someone who worked for me who was, it's gone now, but there was this, you know, effort to send like 10 people to Mars on a one-way trip, like knowing that they were not going to come back. And this woman volunteered to be one of the candidates. You know, they got hundreds of thousands of applicants. They'd necked down to like 100, and they were training them. And then I think they went bankrupt. I think largely a good thing. I don't think they had a serious plan, but I think, complexity of a permanent settlement feels like we are 15 to 20 years away.
Okay, great. And so back to basic students, you were exonerated. I was wrong.
Well, I'm not right?
All right.
Final fell.
And I think we're done here. I think we're almost out of time. So I'll turn it over now to Aiden.
Great. So thank you, Dr. Niewood, for your wisdom and career advices. You talked so much about how you pursued what you loved, your experiences in engineering, DEI. You also mentioned how you like embracing change and picking choices that scared you. I mean, I think we're all here taking this course, doing something that we haven't tried before, seeking discomfort as well. So thank you so much for giving us the affirmation to be here and to challenge ourselves. And thank you so much for inspiring us with your talk. So we would like to give you something for your time. So Abby, would you present the gift?
Yeah, really quick. I just want to say thank you for emphasizing like the importance of having a good mentor. I think that's a really big thing. And then also not only holding true to your own beliefs and feeling comfortable in your own identity, but actively contributing to an environment where other people can feel comfortable as well. I think that's a very important thing. So we would like to present you with a Be Your Works t-shirt.
Thank you, and thanks for having me. Thanks for listening, and thank you for this. Thank you for the shirt. I, not to work, but I will wear it. Many times. So I look forward to it. Great. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.